NUS senior management has responded. To catch everyone up to speed, a ton of tourists came during China's summer school holidays, campus services were strained to the absolute limit, rowdy and rude behavior by visitors caused a lot of complaints to crop up, and there were genuine safety concerns for students living in the dorms nearby. NUS management was in crisis mode, firefighting was being done, but the efforts put out were just not enough. As such, NUSSU had called for a town hall with the Provost Office, campus infrastructure, campus tours, and NUS Libraries on the 21st of August to hold a discussion regarding the tourist influx situation. There was a huge turnout with over 200 students attending, filling out the UTown auditorium where the town hall was at, and crowding out LT18 where it was live streamed as well. I was present at LT18 to learn more about the stance of management, and I've got to say that the 2-hour-long discussion was very civil and constructive. The food catered afterwards was also great. Normally I'll be complaining about management measures because they were either not a thing that students have asked for or were not enough to handle problems, but this time, I think what was covered genuinely sounds good. It can have significant impact if they deliver. Credit must be given where it's due. The representatives on the panel were people who do have considerable say with regards to the implementation of measures. Moderator for the discussions that night was NUSSU President Mr. Huang Zhiwei, from Campus Infrastructure, NUS VP Mr. Ko Yanling, Associate Provost for Undergrad Education and the Coordinator of the Visitor Center Task Force, Associate Professor Daniel Goh, Dean of Studies, Associate Professor Ho Han Kiet, and University Librarian, Associate Professor Natalie Pang. Their responses were mostly satisfactory. There were still some questions left unanswered. The currently implemented measures were improved for the current tourist season that should end by the end of this month, just a few days actually, and more measures are being developed for the next season in January of 2025. The original measures put up on the 14th of August were the setting up of the pop-up visitor center, the deployment of 40 trained student ambassadors to lead guided tours, educating visitors about the guidelines and etiquette, and collecting information for management to create new measures. Communicating with licensed tour agencies regarding visiting guidelines, dining considerations, and shuttle bus usage, deployment of staff for the enforcement of student and staff priority for shuttle buses and UTown canteens, ensuring proper tourist bus pick-up and drop-off in designated locations, placing of signages informing visitors of the rules and guidelines of limit areas and no photo areas, more ground surveillance and security to prevent trespassing, and the increasing of frequency of the cleaning and maintenance of public areas. Those were not enough to manage the crowds, so improved measures were rolled out by the 16th of August, which were the deployment of security personnel stationed at Kent Ridge MRT and museum bus stops to enforce shuttle bus access controls from 8 AM to 2 PM, the deployment of enforcement officers for UTown canteen access controls from 10:30 AM to 2:30 PM for lunch and 5:30 PM to 7 PM for dinner, the reactivation of the gates for Central Library and Medicine and Science Library until further notice, and the collection of more information on the unofficial tours and tour guides for better measures to be put in place. Behind the scenes, management was also preparing plans to roll out more measures to be ready for the next season's influx in January 2025 by having systems for the registration of student docents and tours, the registration of tour buses, and access passes for NUS community members and visiting academics. Following the town hall discussions, another measure was taken to combat an urgent issue. That was to ramp up the security for RVRC and Raffles Hall, both ungated dormitories near hotspots. This means that most, if not all of the NUSSU proposals have been enacted in some way, shape or form. And that was the short version of it all. Now, I'll get into the details discussed in the town hall, and it will be very long, so sit tight. According to data collected by the student ambassadors and surveys on tour guides, 19 unofficial tour groups were found on top of the 10 official SDB tour agencies providing tours to NUS. Some of the unofficial tour groups were hostile to inquiry, used abusive language, and held xenophobic comments. For the official tour agencies, NUS feels that it is easier to control them. Prior to February, NUS did not know of the situation where tour agencies were coming into NUS. Working with the Singapore Tourism Board, NUS now keeps in close contact with these agencies and can easily update them on NUS tourist guidelines, dining considerations, and the usage of shuttle buses. With their tour operating licenses and future entry to the campus at stake, these tour agencies are more than willing to follow the rules. Official tour groups are highly recommended to register with NUS for free official tours provided by the student ambassadors, with the additional benefit of being given exemptions for tour bus registration for entry into campus. Speaking of tour bus registration, this will be required for all tour buses entering the campus once the system is implemented. There will be limited slots available in each half of the day, and tour buses going to NUS Museum and for official programs and events will have to sign up as well. Those that are going for official programs and events will, of course, be given priority. This will help with improving traffic and allow shuttle buses to operate more efficiently. With regards to the unofficial tours and the posting of tour services on Xiaohongshu, NUS also did not know of their existence until July this year. The student ambassadors were the management's eyes and ears to collect more information about them so that they could formulate targeted measures against them. This needed time, unlike the bus stops and the libraries, which could immediately enact measures. But what we do know is that we can refer to the Singapore Tourism Board Act 1963, Part 3A, Sections 21 and 22. To explain it simply, it means that no one should act as a tourist guide or advertise tour guide services unless they hold a valid tourist guide license. People who provide guide services for groups of 8 or more tourists are automatically presumed to be doing so for money unless proven otherwise. These people, by law, would thus require a license to provide tour guide services. The exceptions to this are if the people providing this service are either the owners or operators of the place or they are employed by them to provide such guide services. Unlicensed tourist guides can be fined up to $5,000 for the first offense and up to $10,000 for subsequent offenses. This was brought up by a student ambassador from the union, and the panelists did recognize that it is an issue and would make the law known. This was included in the email blast from the Provost's office shortly after the town hall, and it also made its rounds on the Straits Times news. To regulate these unofficial student-led tours, a new system will be developed to allow students to register as docents. They will be provided with training every year to be equipped with the knowledge of campus guidelines and etiquette, ways to handle tourists, so on and so forth, and this is comparable to the training that students ambassadors receive. These registered student docents would then be given a special ID, which would have to be worn for easy identification. When they wish to conduct tours, they would need to reserve a tour slot, which is limited daily to help manage footfall on the campus grounds. Loose tourists that visit independently of the tour agencies or docent-organized tours could also make use of the registered docents for tour guide services. This would make the registered docents be engaged by NUS management to provide these guide services and thus fall under the license exemption as stated earlier. From there, anyone hosting unofficial tours will be reported to the authorities, and students would face disciplinary actions and sanctions based on the NUS rules. Regarding the question as to whether it is feasible to involve the Singapore Tourism Board to help out, the panelists said that it would be a bit difficult for them to actively put boots on the ground to enforce the issue of illegal tours within NUS. However, NUS is already working with the STB rather closely and could potentially ask for some help to enact punishments on illegal tour guides in NUS. The panelists then commented that most of the tourists do not know better as they come from different cultures, that students also have a part to play by letting tourists know of the campus tour etiquette, and that with enough pressure, the tourists will follow the guidelines provided. Eventually. As for the protections for student ambassadors, currently with only a small number of student ambassadors working in each shift, they are facing a severe manpower crunch and have difficulties managing the extreme surge in tourists. As stated earlier, they will also face verbal abuse and aggressive behavior from irate tourists. It has to be noted that even with the training provided by NUS for student ambassadors, they would definitely still be ill-equipped to deal with such people. It can be extremely draining, extremely tiring to deal with them, and anyone who has worked in retail and customer-facing jobs can relate. NUS management does not have a solution for this as of yet, but recommends that student ambassadors take photos and ID details of the tour guides and report this to campus security for further measures to be taken. There were huge concerns about the privacy and security of the non-gated dormitories of KE7 Hall, Raffles Hall, and RVRC. There have been several reports of busloads of tourists being dropped off near RVRC, with whole groups of tourists intruding on the dormitory area. They were going into level 2 of the dormitory, which was the female floor, opening the room doors, peering inside, and taking photos. Others have reported that tourists have pressured students in the rooms to provide tours for them. And all of this has been making its rounds on the news as well. This was not a problem of recent times, as there were earlier reports dating back to last year on the 31st of July 2023. Although there were security guards deployed at night, residents there felt that there was no sense of security during the day. If we look at the locations of the 3 dormitories, KE7 would likely be the least affected as it is the furthest away from the hotspots of UTown, Central Library, and Museum. Raffles Hall, which is opposite of the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum, might see some tourists bleed in if they cross the road. RVRC will be the most affected by the tourists as Google Map pins of NUS is very close to a small back road that leads to the back of the dormitory. Currently, the main strategy would be to keep tourists to the hotspots of UTown, Central Library, and Museum, and prevent them from crossing over and swarming the dormitories and the school faculties. However, noting the concerns, the panelists have responded that they will deploy security to the area and redirect the buses away from the road. They noted that it will be easy as it is a specific catchment location that they can block off. Signages barring tourists from heading into RVRC will be put up, and additional security will be deployed to patrol there during the day for the remainder of this tourist season. The Integrated Ops Center, which monitors all of the campus CCTV feeds, would also keep RVRC as a highlighted hotspot for monitoring to rapidly deploy security in case of any issues. On the question of whether to get out the dormitories, the main issue would be from RVRC. There was the concern that staff and students also make use of the corridors to get around the campus. As part of the Yellow City network, the corridors in RVRC links science to Yusof Ishak House, which further branches out to engineering, design, central library, computing, business, and FASS. Although currently not heavily used as YH is under renovation, this problem will resurface when YH reopens late 2024. They revealed that this issue dates back to a decade ago from 2014, The idea of getting up RVRC had been brought up several times, and discussions would go as far as inviting consultants to design the perimeter fence and gates before being shut down each and every time. The panelists then asked for more time to discuss with campus infrastructure, OSA, and other stakeholders, and to bring further inquiry to a separate, established platform. Shuttle buses are integral to students and staff traveling around the campus and are regularly at capacity, even without the tourists. The initial stance that NUS took was only to give priority to students and staff, especially during peak periods, without the need for excessive enforcement by security. It was thought that visitors would follow the guidelines and allow students and staff to board first. However, after receiving reports stating otherwise, stricter rules were put in place, with heavier enforcement at high-traffic stops such as U-Town, Kentridge MRT, and Museum bus stops. Shuttle buses heading to U-Town would check for student passes to allow priority entry for students and staff. Then, shuttle buses became strictly for students and staff use from 8 AM to 2 PM. This ruling will remain effective for the remainder of the tourist season, meaning until the start of September. In the longer term, there were a few considerations which were shared by the panelists. Regarding reverting to COVID rules where only front door entry was allowed and student passes were checked, it is very demanding for bus captains to continually enforce it. Also, the load factor now is very different compared to the COVID days where online classes was the default, and way fewer students were on campus back then. With the expected load of 88 passengers per bus, this would make the boarding process painfully slow and affect the majority of students. As such, the decision was that security enforcement, profiling tourists, and stopping most of them from boarding was the more effective solution. Regarding shuttle bus frequency, management feels that efforts to increase the bus trips alone would never be enough. Even with a 25 to 30% increase in bus trips compared to before COVID, and adding additional bus trips in between the existing scheduled buses for traffic-heavy stops, the system is still at capacity. More solutions are being looked into to improve the situation on this matter. With regards to canteens, originally seeing the tourists crowding out students and staff, NUS came up with guidelines to advise tourists to give priority to students and staff during peak periods, placing posters and signages of the guidelines to let tourists know of them. However, seeing that it did not really help with the situation, more drastic measures were taken, with security enforcement actively enforcing those rules. The guards only allow people with students and staff passes to enter the U-Town canteens during the peak periods of 10:30 AM to 2:30 PM for lunch and 5:30 PM to 7 PM for dinner, only allowing certain guests that are accompanying those students and staff. Of course, this is very manpower intensive and blocks out the wider NUS community such as family of staff members and academic visitors that are coming to the campus for conferences. As such, a system is currently being developed by NUS IT to have an application where passes for such visitors can be issued. This way, they will be able to enter the canteens and shuttle buses during the peak periods as well. Once the system is operational come next year, gates could be installed at the canteen entrances which would automatically activate. This clears up manpower requirements so that the enforcement officers can be deployed elsewhere like at bus stops where such automated systems are not possible. They also noted that the time windows are for the current tourist season only. These current measures will end alongside the end of the tourist season and be recalibrated for future seasons according to the crowds. When asked about the issue of tour groups skirting around the rules, such as entering the canteens 10 minutes before protected time and hogging seats into the peak periods, the panelists said that that was the reason for adding an additional 30 minutes buffer time, 10:30 AM instead of 11. They said that this was already near the limit of what can be done, as more would lead to a slippery slope of adding more buffer time until the U-Town canteens were fully blocked off the tourists, which would likely see them bleed over to the nearby faculties to eat instead. And if that were to happen, it would bring the problem a lot closer to a lot more students. As such, by having a protected time window for lunch and dinner, it will allow most students a reasonable period for meal times without having to fight with tourists for space, while also still allowing tourists to dine in during the off-peak periods. When asked about whether the measures currently implemented in U-Town canteens would also be pushed to other canteens, the panelists stated that those measures would be implemented if there is an observed increase in tourists crowding those canteens. Based on security camera footage monitoring and patrols by officers on site, the other canteens such as Techno Edge and The Deck do not seem to have additional tourist-induced crowding. Therefore, those measures have not been implemented in those canteens yet. There is a specific pain point, however, and that is Frontier, the canteen at the science faculty. Students have asked if preventing tourists from entering will help in relieving some of the crowding. The panelists have argued that implementing the same measures will not be effective and will not move the needle by much. It must be noted that this canteen is the closest to Kentridge MRT and serves not only students from the science and medicine faculties, but also staff from NUH, DSO, and other academic collaborators in the laboratories nearby. This has caused large crowds even before the tourist influx, and thus implementing the measures to gatekeep tourists checking for passes would only slow down entry and exit for current diners. NUS management has long been aware of the issue and has already increased seating capacity at the foyer below Frontier, but also still admits that it is not enough. They have been considering opening more F&B outlets, but there is only a limited land package that NUS is allowed to develop. Current ideas include using some of the open green space beside Frontier or repurposing the seminar rooms above. Another idea floated by the panelists was to issue advisories to NUH staff to not come during peak hours, but later raised a counterpoint that it could lead to NUS students not being able to dine at NUH canteens as a response. They then also reasoned that NUH staff have limited meal times as well, and as such would avoid long crowds to be able to have a proper meal, thus self-limiting the crowding in a sense. The panelists gave a timeline of things to explain what happened regarding the NUS libraries opening to the public and the subsequent response. Discussions started from 2022 about the open library concept, as NUS libraries felt that the libraries were not only study spaces for students, but also spaces for the collection of knowledge which should be open to more people. They also envisioned there to be open spaces for students, industry professionals, and academics to have meaningful discussions. There were also complaints from students about the student metric cards not working when trying to enter the libraries, and thus NUS Libraries was contemplating whether to remove the gates or not. NUS Libraries looked at the other global universities that had gated and ungated libraries, studied the feasibility of doing the same in NUS, and engaged NUSSU to better gauge student feedback, trying to find a feasible solution towards pulling off the idea. While there doesn't seem to be any concerns raised at the end of 2023, a few concerns were raised in February of 2024, coinciding with China's winter school break. NUS Libraries chose to run a pilot program deactivating the gates at CLB's main entrance on the 1st of May 2024. And while there were concerns about doing so right around the examination period and other security concerns, NUS Libraries consulted NUSSU, but ultimately decided to push through to follow the NUS ethos of being an open campus for all. As a precaution, however, the team put up several notices at the stairs to tell tourists that levels 5 and 6 were student-only spaces, and that photo and video recording was not allowed within the library. They also put up some posters about general library etiquette. Now, the team would not know of the measure's effectiveness until the July crowds actually come in. For a while, everything was relatively okay, it was largely incident-free, and most tourists would only be at the lobby to visit the NUS Co-op gift shop. But come July and the massive influx of tourists, things started to turn bad very quickly. On the second day of the school term, on 13th of August, 2 letters came in regarding the situation, and the library team was already talking about reactivating the gates. And 1 day later, on the 14th of August, the gates were reactivated ahead of the Provost Circular addressing the major student concerns. They argued that it was a relatively quick response, that although it might not have met student expectations, they had to consider all the choices available and be mindful of sticking to the law and ethos of the university and not reflexively pull off a knee-jerk reaction. They said that it does take some time to reactivate the gates and that they immediately reactivated the gates even before the calling of a town hall discussion. They also argued that as an educational institution, there were many experimental pilot programs such as the NUS Open Library concept that were being conducted, that they actively monitor the situation, that they would always be ready to pull the plug if things do go wrong, and that they did swiftly pull the plug on this experiment in just 1.5 days to respond to the concerns. To reassure the students that the libraries would not immediately open back up after the tourist season ends, the panelists stressed that the libraries will remain closed until further notice, and what that means is that they will not open the libraries up to the public until the team finds a suitable solution that will not jeopardize student well-being. Many students noted that a lot of the warning signs and reports started to come in way before the summer school break, even back in the last wave around January and February this year, questioning as to why NUS did not enact the measures sooner, and that NUSSU had to resort to such a drastic measure as to call for a town hall for sufficient measures to be put in place. The panelists did say that there were a lot of planning behind the scenes and that due to operational security, certain details could not be shared with the wider student body and the public as early as they wanted to. Some details were also not available because management themselves also had nothing concrete, and more feedback from students is required to formulate effective solutions. They also admitted that NUS had limited resources to handle the situation, and so they had to find the most problematic areas to surgically target those issues, and that the resources would have to be deployed at the right timing to combat the issue effectively and efficiently. Currently, the enforcement capacity is maxed out with guards managing canteens, bus stops, shuttle buses, bus bays, dormitories, and so much more. For future seasons, NUS has committed to hire more security officers to manage the situation, but for now, this is all that they've got. Most students also wanted more transparency in the planning, or for management to provide certain deadlines or timeline guarantees so that the campus would not be caught off guard next tourist season. Of course, NUS would not want to risk not delivering on their promises for this situation, but they would most likely have the systems developed and ready for deployment by the next tourist season in January of 2025. And regarding questions on if they will keep the measures for the remainder of the semester, the answer would be no. The tourist season will end at the end of August, and historically there will be a very sharp drop-off of tourists visiting the campus. While there might be a few tourists here and there for the remainder of the semester, it will not be on the same scale as to what we are currently facing. Nowhere close. As such, it makes no sense to continue with the heightened measures such as shuttle bus and canteen access controls, and heightened security and cleaning in Utown. Still, if it is observed that the tourist numbers are still high even past August, the measures would remain active until the crowd dies out. Throughout the town hall, there were also some banter and jokes and suggestions that are not among the main concerns for this dialogue. In the opening statement by NUS management, Associate Professor Daniel Goh had stated that they have been monitoring online sentiments and gathering feedback through their Telegram channels, anonymous platform NUS Confessits, as well as social media platform Reddit, which brought about laughter from the crowd, knowing all the unhinged memes that have been posted about the situation. After the town hall, we can also see Associate Professor Daniel Goh's online presence in some Reddit threads, answering student responses there and tackling trolls. Responding to students looking to get more operational details that are not privy to them, the panelists joked that they should enter the task force as well to see the behind the scenes. The panelists rightfully ignored suggestions to hijack Xiaohongshu initiatives to control crowd congestions. Regarding a suggestion to restart pilots for shared bicycles in NUS, the panelists stated that the e-scooter initiative will not be possible due to LTA banning e-scooters on pedestrian walkways, and that NUS will not allow e-scooters on the narrow campus roads either. The shared bicycle pilot could be reinstated, but they also commented that it would be more feasible for the generally flat Utown as compared to the hilly terrain in the Canteens campus. They then asked for the matter to be taken separately outside the town hall to prioritize the tourist situation. Regarding a suggestion to place a NUS logo somewhere out of the main student-centric areas to allow for tourists just to have photos there, the panelists commented that they have installed a NUS logo outside of Central Library, but noticed that much fewer people have been seen taking photos there, and were way more focused on visiting the co-op gift shop. They then argued that the tourists were mainly visiting Utown for the better amenities as compared to the faculties around them, and that the NUS logo was just a convenient spot for additional photo taking. As for a request to block out the shuttle buses around 6 PM for those taking evening classes, the panelists reiterated that the timings will be looked into and potentially recalibrated for future tourist seasons. There will not be any promises for actually blocking tourists from taking the shuttle buses if there is no significant crowding observed during that time period. To end the dialogue, Associate Professor Daniel Goh stated that this situation is a problem not only to the students but also to the staff. However, as an icon of Singapore excellence, NUS should actively give back to the community and the public, and that it has done so in the past and will continue to do so in the future. He asked for understanding that a lot of pilot programs are rolled out iteratively and experimentally, that not everything will work out, and that they will stop the programs if it affects the overall well-being of students and the community. He then said that all the measures that NUS takes will need to be well considered based on good character, not jeopardize the NUS community that has brought NUS to its current global standing, and to see what NUS can do to give back to that same community. And that was the correspondence on the Town Hall dialogue. Personally, I think that the new measures meant for January have genuinely great potential, and by adding them on top of all the existing security enforcement, crowds and tourist numbers could be controlled to a much more manageable level. Ultimately, it will come down to how well those systems work, and how well everything is executed, and if those measures are rolled out in a timely manner before all the complaints start flooding in. But if properly executed, I do think that NUS could resolve a lot of the issues that we have faced over the past 2 weeks. Of course, this is not the end of the issue. Do continue to share your concerns to the student union and provide constructive feedback to management. There is always room for improvement, and all the feedback will be taken seriously. As long as we remain respectful and civil, there is always a possibility of new measures being born out of further discussions. Oh, one last bit. During the discussions, we had an informant amongst the student body who has provided a lot of contextual information to the situation's ongoings. They have also tipped the management off about a certain disturbing dark side to NUS that we who have attended the town hall are now privy about. Allegedly, there have been illegal training camps and summer schools being conducted in NUS facilities by Chinese agencies. They would advertise summer school services targeting secondary school students from China for a couple $1,000s per person. The agents would then allegedly rent NUS facilities that could be booked by the public and recruit Chinese NUS graduate students to conduct lessons there. Following the completion of those lessons, the students would then be issued fake certificates with forged logos of NUS and NTU, certifying that they have completed a course jointly conducted by both universities. Well, of course, these are all rumors and allegations that I cannot personally confirm, but if true, it is quite scary to think about all the insane underground dealings that have been ongoing right under our noses. Management said that they'll be actively looking into the situation and cracking down on those sorts of incidents should they be found. And that's it. Congratulations for watching to the end. Not a lot of people do, so I am so glad you're one of them. This took a long time to collate, organize, script, record and edit before it became the video that you have just watched.